How's it going, you guys? So in this video, I just want to talk a little bit about junk food. Okay, so most people following my channel probably already know junk food's bad for you. They know refined carbs like sugar, white flour, and also just most grains, most ground grains found in bread and flour, deep fried foods, chicken fried chicken and stuff like that. Everyone knows that that's just bad for you. But what a lot of people don't understand is how your cravings for these foods are formed. Okay. So when you eat refined sugar, even like sugar in general, if you consume turbinado sugar, organic cane sugar, whatever, all of those simpler carbs, okay, they feed bacteria in your intestine that feeds on those foods. Okay, so you're eating the carbs and it goes down. It's partially digested by saliva, but mostly digested by intestinal bacteria. Your gut microbiome, they call it, right? The probiotics in your gut, it feeds on these refined carbs. So now you got bacteria living in your intestine that are only surviving and alive because you're giving them a steady stream of food from the refined carbs. And so as long as you consume these refined carbs, that bacteria exists in your intestine. Now, what happens when you remove the refined carbs? The bacteria starves and it starves and it needs more refined carbs to stay alive. So what does it do to stay alive? The same thing all bacteria does, okay? It has a DNA response where in this case, it causes cravings. It makes you want more of that food. So those crazy cravings that you get, for some people who eat a lot of it, if you get cravings for sugar, 3 or 4 hours in between eating, the more frequently you get these cravings, the more of that bacteria probably exists in your intestine. Those cravings are only there because you fed this bacteria before, and it needs those carbs to survive. So your cravings for bread, this like, oh, I love pasta. I love bread. Oh, like that's my favorite food. I'm treating myself to sugar. That's not treating yourself. That's treating the bacteria living in your intestine. And these bacteria have been associated with a lot of chronic diseases. So the association is not causation. But the fact is that the only reason why you crave these foods and why you love them so much, it has nothing to do with who you are. It's not your identity. Most people identify with it, which is why it's so hard for them to let it go. Because if they remove it, they're like, why am I depriving myself of something that gives me 30 minutes of pleasure? Like meth. Um, anyway, you're not depriving who you are, of anything. You're starving bacteria in your intestine. And so if you remove these foods from your diet, you will, like, for 4 weeks, okay? First of all, the first couple weeks, you're gonna have withdrawals. You're gonna have what they call die-off symptoms. Some people believe it's a full-blown Herxheimer reaction or detox reaction, where you remove this food and then you have flu symptoms and all sorts of just crazy symptoms, almost like you're detoxing from a drug, like from meth. And that's because these bacteria are literally dying off in your intestine, okay? And there's other reasons too. The sugar, actually, there's some studies that show refined carbs and refined sugar actually directly stimulate neurochemicals like dopamine and noradrenaline and endorphins in a similar way to, actual hard drugs. And we know for a fact that wheat actually creates morphine-like compounds in the brain as a byproduct of digestion. And also dairy proteins like casein creates what's known as casomorphins that create a morphine or an endorphin-like reaction similar to heroin. These are facts. You can look up casomorphine. And I actually eat dairy, so it's not like I'm, biased against that. But the point here is this food is addictive. And people identify with their cravings. And like they think that they're going to be like losing out on a big part of life if they remove these foods. But like that's literally like an alcoholic who has to avoid alcohol at all costs. And he's like, oh, one little drink's not going to hurt me. Like, as long as you keep that addictive substance in your diet, you're going to crave it. And that's especially true for these carbs. What happens if, you remove carbs for like 2 weeks? Or not carbs, but like refined carbohydrates, Well, you're going to go through the withdrawals. And if you allow one day of eating these foods, you're going to give that bacteria some more fuel and it's going to grow. And those cravings are going to get worse. So this is why I'm not a fan of this if it fits your macros type of dieting or flexible dieting, because it allows cravings to continue and you're like starving for food because you allow the junk. So then you have things like artificial sweeteners. Well, how do artificial sweeteners work? Well, first of all, they do stimulate taste receptors on your tongue, and also they artificially stimulate uh, neurochemicals in your brain associated with the reward centers. So they literally stimulate the reward pathways, which is associated with addictions and motivation. And that again is directly stimulating cravings, essentially. The same way that sugar does, only now you're not giving your body like an actual source of blood sugar. And so a lot of experts believe these artificial sweeteners like sucralose and whatnot raise insulin without the corresponding raise in glucose. So now you get an exaggerated insulin response without the blood sugar that the insulin is meant to shuttle into the cells. And so what happens? It's possible you can develop a hyperinsulinemia from this. Possible. So if you feel low energy or like weird mood responses from artificial sweeteners, that's probably why. So, and people who go on low carb or zero carb diets where they completely remove all carbs from their diet, if they allow these zero carb sweeteners, these artificial sweeteners, they notice cravings for sugar and carbs continue and get worse. Some people, though, notice if they have cravings for carbs, they eat the artificial sweeteners and their cravings go away. But for me, it's been my experience that as long as I allow even things like stevia in my diet, but especially sucralose and these other things, that the cravings continue. But if I remove them altogether, I don't have cravings. I can walk through a donut aisle and smell the donuts and not even care. In fact, I'm a bit disgusted and I get nauseous because I think my body's like regained its natural appetite and senses of health and toxicity. Another thing, like these refined carbs and sugar are the primary cause of tooth decay. There's been studies. Okay, so first of all, we have the work of Weston Price, who visited indigenous cultures in the 1900s and found they had perfect teeth, but then when they were visited by the the Westerners who brought the sugar and things like that to these indigenous cultures, and they replaced their indigenous foods with sugar and refined carbs. Now, Weston Price, 30 years later, came back and found all the generations. So all of the people he saw before who had perfect teeth before sugar and refined carbs, now they have tooth decay. Now they have diabetes. Now they have signs of heart disease and obesity. And the generations that were spawned from the parents who ate these refined foods now had jaw deformities and things like and genetic deformities. You can think of like Down syndrome and stuff like that. Could definitely be caused by poor nutrition of the previous generation. Absolutely. It becomes more common as the DNA and things are weakened over time. There's also been studies, and I posted these, I think I might have made a video about this before, but I posted these on my Instagram in the research tab on highlights. There's actually been intervention trials where groups of people who were instructed to either eat their normal diet that contained a high amount of refined carbs or a paleo type of diet where they're eating meat, milk, even honey and fruit, as well as whole grains. And both groups were instructed not to brush their teeth. And the group that did not, and they already had pre-existing gingivitis or periodontal disease. The group that did not eat the refined carbs and were instructed to eat the paleo diet, and they were consulted throughout the study. I think it was a 12-week study. They had no progression in their periodontal disease, and in fact, they actually had improvements in their pockets and their gingivitis progression. They actually had improvements in the condition. Whereas the group that continued eating the refined carbs actually had um, the predicted normal continuation of the disease. And they actually did swabs of the bacterial population in the mouth, and they found that people who did not eat the refined carbs, despite not brushing, they actually had very little, if any, um, bacteria associated with dental decay and gingivitis, and more of the good bacteria associated with good dental health. Whereas the other group actually had a lot more pathogenic um, dental bacteria. And so you could say, based on this intervention style, and there was actually, I believe, two others that did the same thing, found the same thing, and Weston Price also found the same thing. And basically, independent of brushing and dental hygiene, these refined carbs have unique properties that directly contribute towards dental decay and gingivitis and dental disease. So, why the fuck do people eat these carbs? Why do they allow these foods in their diet? I mean, really. And if you look historically, you'll find one of the, so the ancient Egyptians who ate mostly wheat, they had signs of obesity and they had signs of plaquing in the arteries and heart disease, despite extremely low amounts of meat in their diet. Vegans came out trying to debunk this, claiming they ate a lot more meat than we think, but I'm pretty sure that that's we don't really know how much meat they ate, but we could say probably not much. And they also drank a lot of alcohol on the side because they had to purify the water somehow. So it could have just been the alcohol, but I'd say it's a combination of the high amounts of alcohol that contributes to fatty liver disease, which contributes to diabetes, as well as the high carbohydrate intake. Together damage the liver. So anyway, even though it's whole grain and stone ground and whatnot. So in conclusion, you're only eating that because of the bacteria that's living in your intestines, and you're not doing yourself any favors by treating yourself to these foods. You're just continuing the cravings. Makes no sense to eat these foods, not giving you any benefit, directly contributing towards dental decay, diabetes, heart disease, and fat gain. Unless you're an athlete like me training multiple times a day, you don't need any more than 50 to 100 grams at the most of carbs a day, okay? Even as an athlete, what we found in a low-carb community is about 150 grams a day. Anything more than that, we don't see a improvement or a difference in our performance. So these people who are eating massive amounts of carbs on a regular basis who don't even exercise or are not athletes, why? Why, other than addiction? Really? Leave your question and comments down below. Talk to y'all next time.